As Israel shifts from airstrikes to a limited ground operation, it is having to confront many new challenges. Some of these challenges involve risks to Israeli troops, while others deal with strategic and humanitarian objectives. Already, these challenges may have delayed a full-scale invasion of Gaza, and they could cause Israeli leaders to limit the scope and scale of their military operations. The first challenge is the very nature of the fighting. Gaza is built up, it is densely populated. It has a population of more than 2 million people crammed into a 200 square mile area. It is one of the most densely populated places on the planet. In its narrow streets and tightly packed buildings, many of the Israeli army's advantages, whether it's speed, communications, surveillance, and long-range firepower, all get neutralized. Instead, the IDF will need to break up its forces, which will then make them vulnerable to small bands of Hamas terrorists. The rubble created by Israeli bombings also offer opportunities for small groups of Hamas fighters to find cover against Israeli troops. The US military found the urban operations in Fallujah in Iraq more than a decade ago difficult and highly destructive. Gaza is likely to be even harder. In fact, the Battle of Fallujah in Iraq was challenging. It was brutal urban warfare for American troops who were not trained for it. The difficulties stem from several factors. First, the city has urban, dense landscape that negates many of the military's conventional advantages. It's also limited both in scale and in speed. Second, the Battle of Fallujah pitted the US military against a deeply entrenched adversary. In this case, a well-prepared and determined insurgency group. And lastly, the enemy's use of tunnels and booby traps and civilian facilities as cover compounded the complexities, leading to a protracted urban battle. Hamas has controlled Gaza since 2007. It has fought Israel there several times in the past. The group probably anticipated a tough Israeli response to the October 7th attacks. Hamas has long prepared for an Israeli incursion into Gaza. Hamas has co-located military supplies and assets in civilian facilities like schools and hospitals, and no less than the United Nations is confirming this. The group has also built a vast tunnel network, thought to be bigger than the London Underground. It can use these tunnels to hide supplies, as well as to ensure communication during conflict. Tunnel fighting is an absolute nightmare. The former head of the US Central Command, General Joseph Votel, compared tunnel fighting to the use of the Islamic State and its tunnel networks in Mosul in Iraq. It'll be bloody and brutal, according to this gentleman, because Hamas fighters may use these tunnels to pop up behind Israeli forces, ambushing them or even capturing more hostages. Israel has tried to bomb these tunnels, but they're difficult to find and destroy, particularly from the air. The battle for Mosul in the war against ISIS presented formidable challenges for the US troops. Mosul was the second largest city in Iraq. It was a major ISIS stronghold, and the fight was particularly complex because of the urban environment, which forced troops to contend with narrow streets, limited mobility, and it also made civilian safety a priority. Additionally, ISIS also employed guerrilla tactics. They used car bombs and suicide bombers, and all of that inflicted heavy casualties on American troops. Overcoming these challenges required a well-coordinated effort bolstered by local forces, more importantly, intelligence and precision airstrikes. Ultimately, the persistence of the coalition forces combined with rigorous planning led to the liberation of Mosul. It was a significant blow to ISIS and its territorial control in Iraq. Israel seeks to destroy Hamas, which in practice means killing its leaders. But they are proving difficult to find. They can hide in these tunnels, they could blend in with the civilian population. Some will choose to fight, of course, but the organization is so institutionalized that it's undoubtedly going to try and preserve much of its leadership, particularly the fighting ones, key figures like military commander Mohammed Daif. Israel in the past has successfully targeted Hamas and other leaders, But it was a slow process. Even with an occupation of northern Gaza, if that is the Israeli war plan here, that would mean that Israel would not control large parts of the southern strip, allowing Hamas to entrench its leadership amongst the civilian population. And what's more important is that much of Hamas's senior political leadership, they don't even live in Gaza anymore. They're all spending their days in much safer countries like Qatar, Turkey, and Lebanon. Making this harder are the 200 or so hostages that Hamas has taken, which includes many foreign nationals. At the very least, this will complicate Israel's fighting. A building in which Hamas leaders are hiding may also have these hostages. They could do this with tunnels as well, where Hamas supplies are kept. Sending troops in to attack these locations, let alone simply blowing them up, could even kill the hostages, and that is something that Israel can ill afford. In addition, Hamas has threatened to kill the hostages in response to Israeli attacks. It has not done that just yet, but as far as we know, it could very well do so in the future. Indeed, the more successful Israel's ground operation is, the more likely Hamas would resort to desperate measures like killing hostages. Israel will face even more fundamental challenges when it seeks to end the military operation. One difficulty in uprooting Hamas is the question of who or what is going to take Hamas's place. The Palestinian Authority is barely popular in the West Bank where it rules, and it would damage its already weak credibility amongst the Palestinians if it collaborated with Israel. Egypt and other Arab states are reluctant to take in Palestinian refugees, let alone take on the messy task of rebuilding Gaza. But if Israel simply strikes and then leaves, Hamas will reassert itself, either in a similar shape and form as in the past, or in a new shape and form. No one will contest Hamas's control in Gaza. So the final result may involve some degree of ground operations, but it's likely to be a more cautious approach. Rather than an all-out invasion, Israel certainly would not want to have any kind of long-term occupation of Gaza. That seemed to be one of the priorities in the immediate aftermath of the October 7th terror attacks. But such an approach would not destroy Hamas, but it will still quell the anger on the Israeli street, as we have seen in these last 3 weeks since those deadly October 7th attacks.